Hello, and welcome to Shelf Life from the Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm Sarah Lawson, Associate Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. A couple notes before I hand the program over to our speakers. Please share your questions using the Q&A tab on Zoom. Also, this event has optional closed captioning, which you can turn on and customize at any time with the Captions tab at the bottom of your window. If you haven't already read today's book, we hope you will. For details about how to buy it from a local bookseller or check on a copy from the library, visit vabook.org, where you can also explore our full schedule and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. Our moderator is Lydia Conklin, a writer who has received a Stegner Fellowship, a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, 3 Pushcart Prizes, a Creative Writing Fulbright, a grant from the Elizabeth George Foundation, and fellowships from Emory, McDowell, Yaddo, Hedgebrook, and elsewhere. Their story collection, Rainbow Rainbow, is forthcoming. And today's featured author is Henry Hoke, author of The Groundhog Forever. Henry also wrote the Book of Endless Sleepovers and the story collection Genevieve's, which won the Subito Prose Prize. He co-created and directs the performance series Intertext, and his memoir Sticker is forthcoming from Bloomsbury's Object Lessons. Henry, thanks for being here. I believe you're going to start us off with a reading, so please take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. It's amazing to be concluding my novel tour, my virtual novel tour here at the Virginia Festival of the Book, because that's where I began my life in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it's amazing to be joined by Lydia Conklin, who is one of my favorite writer people on the planet. Just an incredible comic creator and fiction writer, and I'm so excited for their book, which is only a year away. I'm counting the months. But I think about their work every day. And I wrote this book actually when we were living 10 feet apart in dorms at Sweetbriar College, teaching at the University of Virginia Young Writers Workshop. So I had the presence of Lydia as well. I created this book. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from The Groundhog Forever, from part 2 of it. It follows 2 film students in 2004, on one day of 2004, April 27th. As they get stuck in a loop together. Their names are Thing 1 and Thing 2, and the loop includes a screening in one of their classes where they watch the movie Groundhog Day and meet Bill Murray, who's joined them in class as a guest. And this takes place after they've sort of realized they're stuck in the loop and they're figuring out what to do with themselves. And every morning, Thing 1 wakes up and her girlfriend is leaving, like without saying goodbye, just like leaving the dorm room. And that's how she wakes up every day. And her girlfriend's name is New Rochelle in the book. So here we go. Thing 1 stood in the bathroom and debated the need to brush her eternal teeth. Thing 2 sat using Thing 1's computer. It felt right to end their days in her dorm room, this cozy, abnormal space. Thing 2 read a short email from his mother, an email that he'd missed on previous iterations. He knew that she was about to go to sleep when she wrote it, about to say her prayers down south. He knew that if he replied, there'd be no way she'd see it until after 6 the next morning, when he'd already have jumped back. Defiant of time, he typed and sent sunly XOXOs into the void in hopes that she'd be restless or rise early and check. A melancholy slid into his insides with the last of the beer. They decided to sleep side by side on the bed, and for hours they couldn't. Thing 2 waited, awake, to teleport away. Thing 1 waited for him to be gone. Thing 2 coughed and shifted. I think I'm getting sick, he said. You won't, said Thing 1. He rolled over and faced the wall. It sucks. What? She asked, drowsy. I was really kind of looking forward to 2005, looking forward to having a new president. Thing 1 and Thing 2 decided they had superpowers. Besides knowing the short future of Tuesday, they could also stay up all night, no sleep necessary, because they'd always be rested at the same level upon waking. All superpowered people need a code. They sat in Thing 1's dorm and made separate lists, word processed and handwritten. Thing 1 titled hers, The Code, What We Won't Do. Thing 2 titled his, Dumb Stuff We Never Have to Worry About Now That We Have Forever. Never hook up with a soldier, typed Thing 1. Student loans, wrote Thing 2. Never leave the city, typed Thing 1. Having a career, wrote Thing 2. Their lists grew comically long. They could see the world shrinking and were gleeful. Each line they wrote felt like a goodbye, like they were waving from a train at a person sprinting down the platform, a person they were ecstatic about not having to see again. As they wrote, they considered the absence of consequence. Thing 2 thought of a TV personality he loathed. Thing 1 fixated on the professor who always squeezed her shoulders in the hallway. Violence inside them swelled and abated, and simultaneously, Thing 2 on his notepad and Thing 1 on her computer, they added, "We do not torture. We do not torture." If they could time travel, they'd be able to see themselves from the outside in the act of list making, and they'd laugh. They must have looked ridiculous, working hard on manifestos that would disappear with the morning, every bit of ink and every digital tally mark gone. But there was only one version of them, locked inside their bodies. They didn't have the privilege and excitement of narrowly avoiding other versions of themselves to prevent paradoxes and catastrophes. That happened in some other movie. On page 5 of Thing 2's notebook, this futility hit him and he ripped out the pages, balled them up, and threw them into the bathroom, missing the tub by inches. Thing 1 turned and looked at the crumple. "I'll remember the important ones," Thing 2 promised. Thing 1 went back to her document and put a finishing touch on the 3rd page, making sure to save the changes. Saving changes felt important if they couldn't affect real change or couldn't see the effects of that change. "Can we change the fact that one shitty thing someone says about you can haunt you every day for the rest of your life?" she asked. "No, but that happens with good things too," he countered. "Come on, you know that's not true." Their real superpower was impermanence. People with superpowers also need missions. Thing 1 went first. "Ask me what I've never done." "What have you never done?" Thing 2 complied. "I've never broken up with someone." She'd been broken up with, though, a handful of times she'd largely repressed. The first time she'd been dumped by an answering machine at the end of a summer spent apart before middle school started. She could still remember the boy's voice, but she couldn't remember his face. "It has to be in person," she said, and thought of New Rochelle's outstretched hands. At Thing 2's request, as they sat on the bed in what was now their ritual, Thing 1 recounted the Monday night with New Rochelle. "I asked her why she was having trouble sleeping, and she said she was thinking of Palestine." They called it Monday night, always, to signify that bygone naturalistic time, in place of last night. Last night was fast becoming a meaningless phrase. New Rochelle's leaving every morning already bordered on permanent abandonment, and Thing 1 couldn't let this be the final word. "I think I can catch her next time," Thing 1 said, and cracked just one knuckle of one finger. Thing 1 felt the punch of New Rochelle shutting the door, and as usual, it pulled her eyes open. She shouted, "Wait," but only a hoarse rasp popped out. She gulped and swung up to perch on the edge of the bed and try another, and this time the wait worked, but bounced off the closed door and the thick old walls, and she knew it had gone unheard. She swung open the door to see the emptiness that stretched to the curb of the hall, and belted the loudest "hey" she could manage around it. There was no echo and no response, and as she waited for New Rochelle's possible return, she looked down and remembered how little she was wearing. Embarrassment seemed stupid, but she shut the door and went to her drawer for pants and a shirt, anticipating footsteps to signal New Rochelle's return. None came. She went to the door again, and before opening it, felt woozy from all the dressing and thought better of running out. Instead, she sat down and stirred the possibilities around in her mind, how the confrontation would go. "I don't know what this is, but I don't want to do it anymore. I'm sorry," she might say. She sat and felt sick, but she was more than ready to hurt someone's feelings. When she could manage to stand, Thing 1 called Thing 2 to wake him and share how she'd struck out. They started to work out a plan. Since Thing 1 had the power to wake Thing 2 early, he would hustle over a few avenue blocks and intercept New Rochelle downstairs or on the street or as close as he could to make it to her escape path. New Rochelle didn't own a cell phone, couldn't be stopped with a comeback call. "What do I say?" he asked. He'd only met New Rochelle once. She mostly steered clear of the film school and any of Thing 1's friends. "Figure it out. You feel great and I'm all messed up, so it's your duty." She scrunched her hand around her hair and envisioned New Rochelle's train chugging north, New Rochelle gazing out the window, indifferent of the space growing between her and the city and the girl in it. Thing 2's voice punctured the thought bubble. "You want to hang out?" "No, I want to go back to sleep." "Me too." Thing 2 had worn passable basketball shorts and a t-shirt to bed, another advantage. When his cell phone woke him, he was able to obediently toss his shoes on and sprint toward Thing 1's dorm, without so much as hearing her voice on the other end of the line. To others, he probably looked like a scrawny out-of-shaper doing his first run in a while, but he had a jolt of purpose rocket fueling him all the way to the claustrophobic lobby of the Fifth Avenue building. New Rochelle wasn't there. He waved to the security guard and found the left stairwell, stood for a moment and listened for anyone coming down, keeping one eye on the square glass panel back in the lobby to see if she emerged from the opposite side, which she didn't. It was an off hour, most dorm residents already ensnared in their morning classes or hunkered down sleeping. He saw only a couple people pass, neither with any semblance of the curly mane that he knew New Rochelle to have. Since Thing 1 only lived on the third floor, after 10 minutes of waiting, Thing 2 went back into the lobby and stood before the two ancient elevators. The one on the right was broken, its doors blocked by a sign. The one on the left was coming up from the basement. It opened. He looked back at the guard, making awkward eye contact, and decided to step into the elevator to avoid weirdness. Social conditioning was hard to shake. The things didn't catch New Rochelle in the next few tries. Thing 1 lost faith in Thing 2 and stumbled out into the hallway, but she met him in the stairwell on one repeat, at the elevator on another, their quarry never between them. Thing 2 circled the blocks around the dorm looking, checking delis, imagined turning a corner and bumping into New Rochelle's hair, but it wasn't meant to be. They couldn't imagine how she was eluding them, how they were fucking this up. They had the numbers, the advantage. There was no bigger advantage than to wake up every morning and find everyone else still the same. Thing 1 stepped inside her windowless bathroom and closed the door without turning on the light. In the darkness, she wasn't there, in the mirror or anywhere else. The room wasn't there. She was erased in the darkness. Outside of the darkness, New Rochelle got farther and farther away. Thing 2 considered New Rochelle a lost cause, but Thing 1 wasn't ready to give up. She had one more long shot in mind, Grand Central. She knew the train New Rochelle left to take, the time and the destination. But no matter what cab they grabbed or subway they dove into, New Rochelle was already on the train and beyond their reach when they arrived in the atrium of the station. It went without saying that Thing 1 wasn't chasing beyond Manhattan's limits. You could always do it by phone when she gets home, Thing 2 suggested, but then shuddered at the never in Thing 1's glare. I'm sorry, he said, looking at the big clock above their heads. I'm not usually up yet. The space was vast and golden, and people were moving quickly, upset. The things stepped outside. New Rochelle was as unreachable as if she had been taken off in a plane, crossing time zones to an island in the Pacific, an angel already. The sun hit them both from behind. They looked at the street and finally realized what they had missed in all previous repetitions, what had been absent the entire time. When the sun hit them, they no longer cast shadows. Thing 1 woke up on April 27th and made her away message, there are 8 million stories in the stupid city, you're an idiot. Woke up and made her away message, you want to go where everybody knows your pain. Woke up and made her away message, each day is a gift, curse, curse, gift, especially this day. Her dead, fallen, shampooed strands of hair anemonied up in the mesh of the shower drain. Can you stay under the hot water for an entire day? The answer is yes. For 2 days? Also yes. 3? Not if you want to stay friends, Thing 2 said on the other end of the phone when Thing 1 finally sloshed to it. Come on, said Thing 2. It was his turn for a mission. Thing 1 looked down at her wrinkled toes. Pruning for hours under the shower scald was a way to simulate old age, but a half measure. I'm not becoming some other person, she thought. I am her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for your nice words too. I'm such a fan of Henry's writing, and this book, The Groundhog Forever, is my favorite of your books so far. So I'm so excited to be here talking about it, and especially since we have a shared history with groundhogs that I felt should be mentioned. That the place where we were on faculty, there were two warring bands of groundhogs called the Red Team and the Brown Team, and I wondered if they caused some small inspiration.
I was looking at them the whole time.
Yeah.
Amazing out the window, yeah.
Yeah. But the part you read is so beautiful, and I won't ruin what happens with New Rochelle, but it's such a great payoff later on in the book. And I wanted to ask you, because I rewatched the movie of Groundhog Day, which I hadn't seen since childhood, a couple of days ago, and I just found it's so claustrophobic, the movie, and like anxiety producing. Even though I hadn't watched it since childhood, it felt like that day was kind of embedded in my own memory. And every time like the DJs start their stupid banter, it's just this cringy, horrible feeling. And like the whole movie, even though things start to change, it feels like this shrinking of possibilities. But even though your book also is just one day, it feels like, and the excerpt you just read is a great example of this, it feels like there's this widening of possibilities and this expansiveness. And I wondered how you were able to achieve that within one day, because I never felt this kind of like repetitive anxiety that I felt watching
Mm.
the movie.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's so interesting to think about the source movie, because again, like I hadn't, I'd seen it. Maybe I spoil it later that this was a real thing that happened with Bill Murray and everything for me, but I hadn't really watched it since then because it was hard to match that experience of watching it in a room with Bill Murray there. But I watched it again many years ago, and I sort of had the same feeling. I think I was sort of connecting to how much of like the sort of boomer residue of like midlife crisis is so central to so many movies of like our youth, movies with adults in them. It was like there was a lot of that like sort of disaffected depression, a lot of these SNL people like Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, who were like the protagonists. And I think that is so reflected in how we encounter that movie. It's really just like this, it's a midlife crisis, and he's stuck in a place where he doesn't have access to the things that he can indulge in. And I think that for me it was like, well, this is about youth and about like queer youth, and it's about New York City, and all those things like inherently made it full of possibility, I thought, because he's at this point, the weatherman Bill Murray in the Groundhog Day. I call it the Groundhog movie because I keep evading. But he's at this moment where he's hit with depression and disaffection and despair from sort of the jump. And I think that my characters are immediately excited because I think what they are is that they're at the beginning of their life, that of their like out life in a way, like of their coming into being and of experiencing New York. The real beginning of their New York life was September 11th, was the first week of their classes. That's when they met and bonded, and that's a sort of pivotal part of the movie. Sorry, the book. But yeah, I get them confused. But yeah, the pivotal part of the book is that was their sort of early trauma, and this is sort of later on, 2 years later, and so much of that was that everything they encounter feels exciting and full of possibility from the beginning, because they have the context of the movie. They know that they can do it differently, and they run into some obstacles to doing it differently. But that's for readers to find out.
Great. Yeah. And I noticed also in rewatching the movie, there's that kind of standard like 90s rom-com mission, which is that a mediocre jerk man can like, there's always a way that he can achieve like the most amazing woman who happens to be in the film. And with Groundhog Day, it takes him some 8 years of being in the same day to get to that point, but it's just kind of like the same mission that's in every 90s rom-com. But in your book, the missions change. Like you read the part where the mission is to finally get to break up with someone and see how that feels. And there's at one point, one of them helps the other see like a sun shower because they've been missing rain and there's no rain on that day. And so there's lots of different missions that change through the book, and it's kind of an evolving mission as opposed to this kind of one like misogynist, like heteronormative mission of the movie. So I wondered how you approached like structuring the book around all the different missions and how they evolved over time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you summed that up so beautifully. Thank you. That was really the approach. I think it was inherently just that I removed that sort of heteronormative, frustrating arc that I didn't want to replicate. I mean, it's not like, I mean, they're characters that have a deep bond and friendship, but they're queer characters, gay and lesbian characters, coming to their own sexualities, but they're not romantically involved. So like their possibilities are not like, it's not inherently like will they, won't they, and they're not in pursuit of like someone else who they have this extreme advantage over. I mean, they're pursuing New Rochelle for a reason, but it's not the same thing, and it's not the whole arc of the book. So I think just in doing that, it opened up the possibility for me to explore every encounter, every experience you could have or you could hope to have, because there's not some cookie cutter capitalist goal, which I think all those movies are kind of reinforcing, of like at some point you're gonna like be happy where you are, you're gonna be the favorite of the town, you're gonna win the woman, you're gonna get a house, whatever it is.
Right.
Even that he eventually settles down in a small town and like comes to accept it is all very much like, it's hetero-capitalist coded, and for me it was like they don't want to return to anywhere small, they want the brutality and wildness and recovering trauma of post 9/11 New York, and they really adhere to it as like the place they're meant to be and become themselves.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also was thinking about what you said earlier about how they know, they have the context of the movie, so they know and they can prepare. And I don't know if you've wandered into like the Groundhog Day Reddit community, but I'd always heard there was like, you know, people fighting over how many days are there, like whatever. And I found this thread where everyone was talking about like, how would they prepare the day before if they knew the next day was Groundhog Day? And so they were like, I would get a lot of sleep, so I'd be really rested when I woke up, and I would make a plan with my mom, which was really sweet. It was sweet to read like how they're thinking about that. But
well, that's way more heartwarming than fandom people I've encountered. I love that. There's a really important thread of like their mothers in this book. You know, it's you know, a small thread, but that connection is like this funny thing for them that recurs, and so I love that that's part of the forums. I think that, you know, it's funny that the way that internet community will wrap truth around something that's just so clearly like high concept for a fun reason, you know, like, and I've read a blog. I've never gone on to like forums about it, but I read a blog where someone was like, here's how we mapped out exactly how many days, you know, he spends in on the same day in Groundhog Day, right? And 8 years, right? Someone's come to that conclusion. Somebody was saying it was way longer because like he'd have to have the time to master piano and other things he gets good at, you know, later on, something like that. What's funny is I was in a room with Bill Murray and that question was asked, like, you know, at the screening that inspired this book back in 2004, was that, and someone was like, how many? And he's like, I don't, he was like, I don't know. He's like, I think at some point we said it was like 10 years. He said, that's basically what he said. But you know, I think that for me, there's an explicit, right before the passage I read, a few pages before, there's a thing about them deciding to lose count, which was really about me deciding to stop having to mark everything on like the 6th Tuesday, the 7th repetition. I was like, no, let's have them decide to lose count, and then I, as the author, can lose count and just vibe, you know. And but then there's sort of this isn't too much of a spoiler, but my characters in the book spend 100 years in this personal thing, and you'll see, but at least in what the book tells, there are 100 years collected. So I got way more perpetual with it, I think, than that movie would ever really want to do. I think that would reach this level of despair that movie's not prepared to deal with, even though it deals with a lot of things like suicide. But I think that it's supposed to be like a livable amount of years. I mean, honestly, it feels like 8 years since I've seen you or many of my loved ones in just these 14, 15 months, you know. So I get how things get really hard really fast with the perpetual.
I wondered about that in the movie, how they ever even counted the days, because it seemed like there were some times when like he'd been watching the bank for the robbery for a long time, but how can you know how many times it was? So
no, and it's clearly, you know, as someone who wrote a book just like it, I at no point was it mathematical. I was like, it's a stylistic flourish, and you're supposed to not know, you know what I mean? You're supposed to get lost in the conceit and just go with it. Yeah,
because I like how sometimes we're really spending a lot of time in one day, and other times it seems like dozens of days pass in just a paragraph or two. But since we were talking about the movie, I just wanted to read, if it's not rude for me to read your work.
Oh, I would love that.
Okay. I just wanted to read a part on page 9 that I wanted to talk to you about. So this is a description of the movie. At first, the weatherman tries all he can to leave the miserable loop. But once defeated, he uses his temporal advantage to be awful. He steals money, binges calories, and ruins other people's lives, as if, why not? He convinces himself that his female coworker will be his salvation, and that he must pursue her sexually, and configures all his repetitive powers in the service of seducing her. A futile and horrible practice. She perceives his game and remains repulsed. The weatherman decides there's no escaping himself. A legendary actor named Bill plays the weatherman. In despair, the weatherman commits suicide, but even this doesn't free him from the same day, the same alarm clock radio song, the same wake up. It's simply a shortcut. He kills himself again and again, writhes in a snowy purgatory, destroying his body with increasingly inventive flair. This is a family comedy. So I just laughed so much when I read that, because it was like, wow. At that point, when I was reading your book, I hadn't rewatched the movie, and I was like, is that really what the movie is? Because I couldn't remember, and then I rewatched it. I was like, wow, yeah, it is. But somehow the way you write it, it just seems like, holy God. But then when you watch it, it's like you're not really questioning that this is a family comedy where a man is like committing suicide and trying to relentlessly pursue this woman who hates him. But it just was kind of, I wanted to read that part because I feel like it's just a good example of your work as a whole in this and other books, that you just seem to have this project of kind of defamiliarizing the quotidian and taking something that we've always looked at and thought about a certain way, and then using your brilliant mind to kind of show, in this case, show like the kind of horrible underbelly of it that maybe we aren't really seeing. But I was just curious about that project, since the book in itself is kind of about the idea of defamiliarizing, you know, the concept of one day, and how you've talked about how it's kind of a poem about mortality, and just if you could share some more thoughts about that.
Yeah. And again, I've described it right as a book-length poem about mortality. And that's how I sort of thought about it thematically. And then also just from a craft level, I thought about it like film criticism. Like at least the whole really the whole thing. There are many moments where like the idea of the film and its lingering effect and its pop culture relevance like is just a shadow, no pun intended, but across the whole proceeding. And I think that I do it a lot. I mean, I think that so much of what I write is it's deeply connected to literature that I've read or pop culture I've internalized, again, like and even using thing one and thing two, using children's book approaches and languages is a huge part of how I write, whether it's poetry or memoir or in this case fiction. And I think I thought a lot about, especially for this one, my good friend Kate Durbin is one of my favorite contemporary writers, and the way that Kate uses Kate crafts books that are her two books are using reality TV as sort of a color palette to write poetry, and sort of experimental fiction. And in doing so, like it's these names that we might be familiar with, whether they're the Kardashians or Lindsay Lohan or these characters from the show Hoarders, which is Kate's new book. But the way that Kate approaches the language starts to shift and change it. And at some points, Kate will use really interesting like pseudonyms or stand-in names for people we all know. And I think we were in conversation a lot because I teach Kate's book and we just are good friends. But part of it was I was thinking, okay, right, like I don't want to keep saying the movie Groundhog Day, and I don't want to keep saying Bill Murray. There's just this level where I was like, okay, and they're called sort of diegetically in the book, they're called thing one and thing two. That's what their friends call them. So it's not like I'm imposing that on them. In a previous book, in the book of Endless Sleepovers, Tom and Huck are my stand-ins for like my boy characters. But that's me, the author, making it that way. It's not like they're culturally called Tom and Huck by their friends, although I play with that. But so this is the idea that like within that, I wanted to defamiliarize by, it's the divine Bill or just Bill, and it's the Groundhog movie. At no point do we hear that it's called Groundhog Day. So just in doing that simple textual sleight of hand, I mean, it's not confusing. It's not meant to confuse anyone, but it's just meant to create a slightly different approach in the text so that we can start to just learn to stop thinking about the reality and be in the pop cultural adjacent fictional world I'm mapping and creating.
Oh, wow, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, great. Yeah, that I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, those little language things kind of invite us to see that it's going to be a little bit of a skewed vision of what we're used to.
Yeah.
I just also wanted to mention that if anyone in the audience wanted to ask a question, you can at any point put one in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll incorporate it in as we go. But since Henry, you mentioned the divine Bill, I did want to ask you about the role of religion in the book and that kind of underlying theme, because we have the minister father, we have the Jesus cab, we have the musician with her conspiracy theories, and it's kind of like this, and the idea of like what happens after you die, and the things have different ideas about that, and afterlife and that kind of thing. And I wondered if you might speak about how that theme crept in.
Yeah. So at the start, I think that I knew that I wanted religion to be, I haven't, written extensively about religion. I was, I don't have like a staunchly religious upbringing or anything in any way. So I was always very sort of open to various modes and honestly just social circles. We've talked a little bit about Unitarianism and other sort of spaces we've inhabited that were really more about like how we were experiencing adolescence than they were to like faith inherently or indoctrination. But so this I wanted to explore because I thought so much about that day of my life. And so I'll maybe it's a later question, but yeah, so this book was inspired because I went to class one day with a friend, and instead of showing like the kind of movies that our professor had been showing, which were sort of 70s art cinema and other things with auteurs who would speak to us, Bill Murray, well, they showed Groundhog Day, and halfway through Bill Murray walked in and he was there watching it with us, and then he hung out with us for about an hour. And at that point, everyone was just, we couldn't believe what was happening. So for us, that was an incredibly like religious experience, I think, for a lot of us, seeing as how he was deified as a comedian, as a movie star from like our early, I was 9 when the book came out, these times where it's like, sorry, when the movie came out, these times where he's so unreachable and he does feel like a god. So celebrity worship was inherent to that experience and became a huge part of this book. It's like, what is that to have your life changed by the presence of something divine? That's why I call him the divine Bill, and because that sort of gets old fast for them, like this idea of like, especially with the perspective on the movie, but also that they realize maybe they're blessed now, like they have the power of the divine. They're sort of working on becoming their own gods. And there's a moment in the movie, the Groundhog movie, Groundhog Day, where he says, I'm God because I'm a god and I know everything that's going to happen. So, and I, that moment always hit me when I was young. I was like, that's what it is. It's like, it's a power trip. And you saw in the excerpt I read, right, how little it really does sometimes to have this power, and what are you putting it in service of? And I think that's really true of life, maybe. So that's really inherent to how they're becoming gods on their own terms. And a part of that is they don't really feel like they're manipulating the world or affecting change or controlling it. They keep getting farther and farther away from that and more into a space of like possibility, and thinking about how power is something you have to process. Like, people who are given power, it's difficult. And I think actually it's a Bill Murray quote at one point. He said, like, when you become famous, you have like about like a year or two to be a complete and utter asshole. And if you don't get out of that and change that, then it becomes permanent. And I don't know if he's implicating himself in how that is, but it was something that I really thought about. I was like, well, right, what are these characters going to process in their eternity and their saintliness and their godliness? And so many different moments in the book, especially because Thing 2's father is a minister, and he was raised with Christianity, and Thing 1 has a very different experience with her father being dead, and I think there's just so much where that keeps coming back to them of like, what is our faith? Like, now that we have seen that there's like, maybe for us, there's no heaven, there's no end, there's no reason to expect transcendence. So how do we transcend in the everyday, every day?
Right. Yeah. Thinking what you said about the God thing, like there's that moment in the movie when Bill Murray is in the diner and just introduces every single person as like, this is Andy and he's gay, and he's like, yeah, I am, and it's like he's talked to all these people and he's found out all their secrets, and now he can just walk around and say like, this person wanted to be a bookkeeper but never had the grades, and just like that godly moment. But yeah, your characters, they don't really abuse their power in the same way in the book. So it's interesting that they do use it, but in a more kind of stealth way, like saving the bike or like, right, or the little things that they do. Yeah.
It's almost like they keep thinking they're getting away with it, like like they're like, how are we doing this, and I think that's just very much about youth, and yeah.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Oh, since you mentioned the day, I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about the real day, but that must have been such a crazy experience of, was he in the room watching and you didn't know until the end of the movie?
Well, so basically, I would say that the two parts of the book that are almost entirely like verbatim from life, besides like how I just have a bunch of little snippets of obviously how we all as fiction writers collect from around us, are just that experience of watching the film, and then also of September 11th, of going through those events and the attacks in Lower Manhattan, where I lived at the time, where I just moved as a freshman. But the day with Bill Murray, so yeah, it was exactly that. It was that we were sitting in the room watching the movie, and we were kind of like, why? And it was kind of confused, for us. And my friends who I make the water boys in my fictional universe, they were like trying to get us to not watch Groundhog Day. They want us to watch Stanley Kubrick instead because they think he's the auteur. It's the thing about it. They were like, why are we watching Groundhog Day? And the professor had to be like, trust me.
Yeah.
And just this hilarious moment, because they wanted to control. They were just very control freaky. Some of my best friends, but I knew that about them. But halfway through, yeah, he just sort of cruised in, sat right near us, and my friend nudged me and said, "It's motherfucking Bill." And so that was amazing, actually. That was, and it's depicted sort of as part of the religious services that you're watching a person with the person. And we weren't strangers to celebrity. We see famous people a lot at NYU film school. Tisch, there's just like they bring a lot of famous people through to like impress us, and they come and screen films. It was a regular thing to either encounter famous people or their kids who went to school with us. Like who were just part of the classes. So it was sort of numb in a way, but that wasn't. That was different because it was this wild encounter with the movie. This was a few years after the movie adaptation had come out, and like there was a lot of this what I call like Ouroboros, pop Ouroboros cinema, where like it's a thing about a thing about a thing, where there's layers. And for me, that was just the moment. And so my friend and I were immediately like, what if this was our Groundhog Day? The minute we were back on the street and we saw Bill Murray walking down the street with our professor, like they were just chilling, we just thought, everything was electrified. Everything was different. Like it was like that was a before and after. And what if this was the day we repeated? And so at some point I envisioned that as a film for many years. I mean, I decided to do it as a novel just because I was like, I want to write a novel, or like I want to avoid writing another novel by writing a different kind of novel. And I was like, well, what can fill that much space? What was a day or a thing that was most concentrated that I can keep writing about for 150, 200 pages? And I thought that in that moment, we felt like this could be a movie. And we almost thought about pitching it for a while because we had just walked down the street with Bill Murray. We were like, well, we could maybe pitch this, like, and he would get involved. And like, it was that early arrogance. And it was for a week we talked about it or whatever. And at some point, maybe I like wrote a little pitch for it. But we had none of the access. If I was a Coppola, I would have probably been able to make that movie happen in some way, shape, or form. But that's not me. That's not my pedigree. But I'm really glad I took it and made it into something different. But in that moment, it was like it was going to be a movie for a while, but sort of a joke. Like, but so much of what I do starts out as a joke, and I just ride it, and I'm proud of it.
Well, that actually, I was wanting to ask you, like, since you do have this past as a filmmaker and screenwriter as well, I wondered if, it's interesting that the book started off as a movie idea, and I wonder if now, having written the book, if it would even be possible to conceive of making it as a movie.
Yeah. See, at this point, I'm just like, well, he's just way too old. You couldn't have the main content of the book. And I think I knew that, and I was excited about that. I think that freed me to actually write the book. I wrote it, 3 years ago. I thought, I was like freed from this idea that it would ever become a movie. I mean, it'd be hilarious if somebody like optioned it or something. I don't think that'll happen. But the sense that like, right, at this point, he's past sort of the expiration date where you could believably think he was, however old he was in 2004.
Right.
And, it doesn't mean that you couldn't adapt it and be like, okay, yeah, it's still Bill Murray. He's quite old now, but he's still coming to a class and watching Groundhog Day, which he may have done again. Who knows? I may not be in the 20 people in that class. Maybe the only people with that experience. But I really like that it has its own. I guess I just have a different feeling about. I really value books that are just books, and so I kind of wanted to web mine up in this. I think my real goal is to make unadaptable work. And I know that it's really important right now, especially, and it's exciting to see a lot of literary stuff transformed and optioned, and it gets the writers a lot of money, which is really difficult for people to get, in our world. So I'm grateful, I'm excited for all my friends who are selling movies and adapting them. But I personally, I love a book that's only a book and can only be a book. And I kind of strive for that. I'm not saying Hollywood's ever going to knock on my door, ever would. But I like the idea that my books exist as books, and they're not something that you immediately think, okay, let's market this, let's adapt it, let's capitalize on it for a new approach. I kind of like that it's just a book.
Right. Yeah, that's something I also think about as a multi-genre writer, is why am I
Yeah.
writing in this genre? And if it's doing something that could be done in other genres like film, then why am I writing it as a book?
Yeah.
Especially since could probably get more audience if it was in a film. But yeah, I think it's important to think about what can this genre do that others can? And this is a book that it's hard to imagine it as a film because it's so special as it is. A question came from Margot Figgins. Hi, Margot. Because this novel is tethered to a shared experience and time in your lives, how do you imagine, Henry, that the novel could be different had your lives not intersected when they did?
Yeah, I love that. I'll have to think for a second. Thank you, Margot, for that question. I guess I'm really excited. I think that I learned so much from Lydia, and working with Lydia, just your energy and your approach to work, the way you present work. I loved how you read my work, and I'm so flattered that you read a piece of it. But I almost feel like I can't read your comics like you read your comics. There's something that you do performatively and energetically. And I also think that, I honestly think that, your spirit is in this book. And I did my other two events with my friend Catherine Faw, who's a novelist who was literally in the book. She's in the book. She was there with me at NYU. We were students together, and we both became writers and got together later on. And then the next person I did, Lisa Lacascio, was also an NYU student for many years, so we had sort of that shared experience. But I honestly feel like, because I wrote this, like I said, at Sweetbriar, looking out at the groundhogs that you named red team and brown team in this forever war for territory, watching them, go about their combat. I feel like your energy is in this, and I think especially because you are someone who's, the present moment is incredibly important. I feel like I was always electrified by your presence, even just in how you perform your work, but also just how you live a day, how each moment was a new sort of adventure, was right there, right in that possibility. And it wasn't that we weren't all navigating the sadness of career and capitalism and general sadness of life, but there was something where I think you have a real deep knack for how friendship and participation and movement can jolt people out of that ennui, and just for both artistically and just socially. And I think so I think having you close by in the other room in our dorm was phenomenally important to the spirit of this book, because I would start each new writing session electrified. And it wasn't just because you were playing Total Eclipse of the Heart loudly sometimes, and that just got me yes, let's do this, let's channel this. Or Chandelier, that was a big one that year.
Yeah,
Chandelier. That's a very spirited present moment song. But so I guess yes, us intersecting, our lives intersecting, was important to this book, I will say. Yeah.
Oh wow, thank you, that's so nice. Yeah, I guess if anybody has a last question, we could maybe take one more, but before that, if just to give people time to think if they have one left, I wanted to ask you, since you have, this is your third book, and everybody should also buy Henry's other books, Genevieve's and the Book of Endless Sleepovers, which are also wonderful. I wondered if you could talk about how different the approach was. I know they're all three separate genres, but they have kind of in some way, it's all your voice and your style at the basic root. And I wondered how approaching this book was different from the first two.
Yeah, I think that the commonality of style is right, that my writing is very fragmented. Well, my what I crafted into is very fragmented, and I think for me, this was really like, and this is still my first and only big story, like the memoir that's coming out in January. Get excited. That's 20 micro essays. So, it's not something where I was filling out a giant story over hundreds of pages. So for me to really do that, to write my first and only big story, even the large novel I'm working on is in stories. So it's really that, like, I had to sort of, find a fragmentary structure. And that's why I wrote this particular book. I was like, well, I can't write that much on one thing unless the lives of my characters are inherently fragmentary. And that got me through it. I think that was like, to write a novel, I had to make a novel where every single other page I could completely start it over. Like I could begin the novel, really, I could begin the story of the novel again every single time. And that got me through it. And it's, it speaks to my attention span, but also just like what I enjoy in writing and how I like to have like super concentrated work. It's just, I guess it's because I'm kind of like a poet spirit who doesn't write poetry in that way, who writes different kinds of books.
Right. Yeah, because even if you look at the Book of Endless Sleepovers, the text on the page, not as much this book, but it almost looks like you'd be looking at a poetry collection. But when you read it, it doesn't read like that. I mean, it has a poeticness to it, but
that's the closest I've gotten to poetry collection. But absolutely, it's still a big story in a way, or a compilation that sort of resonates and speaks to itself, which I guess is what I love about poetry collections.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see how you continue finding ways to make to find larger narratives that have episodic structures, because that's such an interesting project for your career if you continue to do that.
I think it's all I'll ever do, to be honest. Like, I think everything I'll do will have like a unique fractured quality. I think it's just the unique fractured quality of my heart,
Oh.
That's it.
Great. Well, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say before we wrap up, or a message to the world.
Oh, well, check out the book, grab it, enjoy it, get into it.
This is a great book, everybody, and it has a wonderful cover. I'm so obsessed with the and your brother painted this?
My brother Malcolm painted the that cover. I sort of gave him some inspiration from an old film poster I like, and he made that, and H.R. Hagnauer designed it, who also designed Genevieve. So I was really, really grateful to work with one of my favorite book designers as well. But grab it, hold that painting in your hands, and check out the book, everyone.
If we would encourage you to buy the book either from your local independent bookseller, or there'll be a link, and there is already a link in the chat, or if you already missed that part of the chat, you can look on vabook.org to find the link. But thank you so much, Henry, for writing such an amazing book and speaking with us today, and sharing your wisdom and genius. And I also wanted to mention that if you want to check out other virtual events for the Virginia Festival of the Book, that's at vabook.org, which maybe we'll post in the chat too. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. It's been such a glorious time. And thank you so much, Henry.
Thank you, Lydia. This was incredible. I can't wait to see you again.
I know.
We'll make it happen. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.